Ready to begin?
Yeah. Good morning. We'll begin our ward round scenario today. In the last class, we have discussed primary management of head injury patient. So last time we discussed about the basic management in the form of A, B, C, D, E. To me, today will be Dr. Shubhamitra Chaudhary. He is assistant professor of neurosurgery at Bangladesh Neurosciences. So Dr. Shubhamitra will take us through this case scenario, ward round scenario today, and Dr. Shreya will be facing the ward round scenario today. So Milind, you can share the ward round scenario today. Milind? Milind, you are not connected. Oh. Yeah, Milind. Milind, share the screen, the ward round scenario.
Yes, sir. I'll just share in a minute.
Yeah. Milind, you can just read.
Yes, sir. I'll just share in a minute, sir. Actually, so there is some network problem. I'm not able to share my screen, sir.
Today's weather plus waterlogging conditions are horrible.
Yeah.
Network
Yes,
is
sir.
down in many places.
Just a minute, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, is it visible?
Yes. Just read.
Sir, should I read?
Yeah. Sure.
Okay. A 45-year-old gentleman brought unconscious to emergency following a road traffic accident 6 hours back. On arrival, primary survey has been done following ATLS protocol. How will you proceed further?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll just want a couple more details on this. See, basically, you have to do a focused neurological examination on any unconscious patient whenever the patient is brought in. So, hypothetical scenario of such a neurological examination, if you can provide, because we're doing secondary survey and all today, no?
Yes,
So, we need a hypothetical neurological examination. What the patient is like.
Okay, sir. So you want me to say?
I want you to just make one up.
Yes.
Imagine one neurological scenario.
Okay, sir.
You have done the primary survey.
Sir, the
Now
patient
it's time
has...
for secondary survey. It starts with a good.
Okay, fine. I'll make the neurological scenario for you. So the patient's Glasgow Coma Scale score is E2 V1 M3. Okay, the patient has bilateral black eyes. His pupils are bilaterally 4 mm and sluggishly reacting to light. He has a left-sided upper limb twitching which is going on continuously. Proceed.
Okay, sir. Since the GCS score is less than 8, sir, so this patient falls under the category of severe head injury. and the patient has an ongoing twitching which indicates an ongoing seizure activity. Alongside, the patient is unconscious as mentioned here. So by now, since the primary survey is over, the endotracheal intubation and everything has been done. So I will, and I think the patient has already been stabilized. So now I will order for, I will just ask about a brief detailed history of the patient for the kind of impact that the patient had had during the accident.
No,
The mode
before
of
that you
injury.
will terminate the seizure. Before that you will terminate the seizure. Okay.
Okay, sir.
So how will you do that?
Sir, if there is proper monitoring facilities available, I will give, first I will give midazolam or
Not midazolam. No.
midazolam, lorazepam, sir, sorry. I will first give lorazepam to this patient, and followed by I will give
So why not
phenytoin. If that
midazolam?
does not,
Why not midazolam?
sir, it will cause respiratory depression.
And lorazepam will not. Midazolam is incredibly short acting. Okay, you need something with at least something that will reach a plasma level and stay for a few hours. Midazolam washes out in 1 hour or so. So even though the immediate seizure termination capability of both midazolam and lorazepam is similar, but midazolam is usually used as a continuous infusion and not as a single shot. Okay, so how much lorazepam will you give? Adult male?
So 1 ampule, I don't know the exact dose, sir.
1 ampule is probably the lamest answer you could have given here.
I don't know the exact dose, sir. Hello?
Just a second. The exact dose is 4 milligram. I'm just getting down from the car. Just 1 second.
Yes, sir.
Would you start some more anticonvulsant at this stage? Apart from lorazepam, any other anticonvulsant you like to give? We usually give in our patient who are
Sir,
admitted.
levetiracetam, we can give levetiracetam.
Yeah. Let Shubhitra settle. You have to focus on the management, that you have to take a, this is a time that you have not done the history part in the primary survey. In the secondary survey, you're supposed to take the detailed history of the incident and what happened till the time of accident to the time of arrival, and some other relevant history. Yeah,
Sir, I'm back.
Yes, yes.
Sir, I'm back. See, basically seizure termination in an acute scenario is basically you have to give moderate to long acting benzodiazepine. So it has to be either lorazepam or diazepam. Lorazepam standard dosing is 4 milligrams stat IV given over a period of 1 minute, slow push. You can repeat the dose after 10 to 15 minutes if seizures are not terminated, up to once. If after that seizures are not terminated, it means that they will not be terminated with benzodiazepines, and you will have to go ahead and switch to more CNS suppressive medications. Along with lorazepam, as sir was saying, you have to start off a broad spectrum anti-epileptic medication, which can be phenytoin, fosphenytoin, or levetiracetam. So phenytoin loading has to be done. You cannot give maintenance dosing straight away. Shreya, why is loading required?
Sir, because phenytoin gets accumulated when there is accumulation of phenytoin in the liver, followed by which it gets distributed all over the body.
So you will need to have a sustained blood level for phenytoin to work. Okay, so that sustained therapeutic blood level has to be reached before you can expect that any antiepileptic activity of the drug will be present. So what is the loading dose of phenytoin?
Sir, I don't remember.
Don't know. Okay. Loading dose of phenytoin is 18 to 20 milligram per kg body weight. Okay. What is the therapeutic drug concentration for phenytoin in which it will work? It is 10 to 20 microgram per ml of blood. Okay. So 18 to 20 milligram per kg body weight is the loading dose of phenytoin. It has to be dissolved in normal saline, about 100 ml, and has to be infused over a period of 1 hour. So phenytoin infusion 100 ml NS এর ভেতরে 1000 mg কাছাকাছি for an adult male, মানে 10টা অ্যাম্পুল ফেনিটয়েন ভেঙে একটা 100 ml NS এর মধ্যে দিয়ে সেটা 1 ঘন্টা ধরে চালাতে হবে, ঠিক আছে, মাইক্রোড্রিপ সেটে। আর তারপরে কি মানে অ্যাডভান্সড কান্ট্রিতে কি হয় যে ওরা একটা তখনই যেই লোডিংটা শেষ হয় ওরা একটা ল্যাবে পাঠিয়ে দেয় থেরাপিউটিক ড্রাগ লেভেল অফ ফেনিটয়েন অ্যাকচুয়ালি রিচ হয়েছে কিনা না আরো লোড করতে হবে, সেটা কত 10 থেকে 20-র মধ্যে ধরা হয়, সাধারণত 15-র উপরে হলে ধরা হয় যে তাতে সিজার টার্মিনেট হবে। এবার যদি ফেনিটয়েনে কাজ না হয় তাহলে তার উপরে সেকেন্ড ড্রাগ কিছু একটা চাপাতে হবে। Okay, so a second drug may be required if phenytoin does not work on its own. You said levetiracetam. Levetiracetam works equally well. So levetiracetam loading dose key. Levetiracetam loading dose is 20 to 25 milligram per kg body weight. So for an adult male in India, usually we consider 1000 mg to be an acceptable loading dose for levetiracetam. Levetiracetam works through a very large drug window and it is not measurable. So drug monitoring for levetiracetam is usually not required. What other drugs can you use? You can use something called fosphenytoin, which is available as Phospholene. What is the advantage phenytoin versus fosphenytoin? If you have levetiracetam, phenytoin, and fosphenytoin, all three drugs with you in the emergency, which drug will you use for this patient?
Sir, I will use levetiracetam.
You will use levetiracetam.
Yes, sir.
Achha. That is a very good answer, very diplomatic answer. But however, in acute trauma setting, levetiracetam has not been shown to be able to suppress focal seizures. Okay, levetiracetam can be used as an adjunct to phenytoin in focal seizures, according to the FDA recommendation. So you will use fosphenytoin. Why fosphenytoin over phenytoin? Because fosphenytoin can be loaded faster. 1 hour, it can be loaded over 15 minutes. Its dosing is taken as phenytoin equivalence, meaning PE, 15 to 20 mg PE. It is available as something called Phospholene, or some other brands are also available, fosphenytoin, and it can be loaded over a period of 15 minutes only. You don't need 1 hour, and its seizure termination efficacy is better than phenytoin. Okay, so after this, if it is not suppressed, you can start off with a short-acting benzodiazepine infusion, which is midazolam, dose 0.01 to 0.1 milligram per kg body weight per minute. That is midazolam's infusion dose. Or you can use propofol or thiopentone. If the patient is intubated already, you can put the patient on ventilator and knock him out. You can use something called burst suppression. What is that? Propofol infusion at a rate of 18 to 20 milliliters per hour can, when a raw propofol infusion, 18 to 20 milliliters per hour can produce electrical silence inside the brain. It will reduce cerebral metabolism, initiate cerebral protection, and terminate any seizure activity that is going on. Okay, so this is the one thing, matlab patient be knocked out and seizure also terminated at the cost of some hemodynamic instability. BP will fall, so you may need to maintain BP with vasopressin. So that is your acute seizure management done. So whenever you have a patient who is having an acute seizure, first step benzodiazepine, long acting. Second step is broad spectrum antiepileptic drug 1. Third step, broad spectrum antiepileptic drug 2. If both loaded, both therapeutic drug levels reached or not monitorable, seizure not being terminated, switch to propofol. If the patient is intubated, then okay. If not intubated, then definitely intubated at this stage. Okay, that's done. So you gave phenytoin loading and the seizure has stopped. Okay, patient now is E2 ETM3 and same neurological status is there. What will you do? Now
Sir,
what?
Now I will first inquire about a detailed history about the mode of injury.
Okay, it has already been 6 hours since injury. Okay, So you have
Yes.
completed your clinical examination. You cannot take a history from the patient. Okay. So send the
Yes.
patient off to do a CT scan right now. Okay.
sir.
And then you talk to the relatives. Fine. Why?
Okay, sir.
Because suppose the patient has an acute subdural hematoma. There is something called a 4-hour rule for subdural hematomas. Okay. What is that?
So,
And there is something called a 9-hour rule also. What is the 4-hour rule? What is the 9-hour rule?
so first 4 hours are taken to be the golden period during in this intervening period. If we do a definitive management, then we can stop any further damage to the brain.
See, once again, both the 4-hour rule and 9-hour rule are subject to some flawed statistical analysis and all of that. But what is taken as mota-moti dictum is that the brain can tolerate extradural or subdural, that is extraaxial hematomas, for up to a period of 6 to 9 hours. Okay, after that you start getting irreversible neuronal loss, and mortality sharply dips beyond 12 hours. Okay, matlab, for the study that established the 9-hour rule found that patients with acute subdural hematomas who were operated within a 9-hour window had 30 to 35% mortality, and above 9 hours they had a 90% mortality. Okay, so don't waste time. Get a neuroimaging done so that at least you know whether there is a surgically evacuable lesion at this stage. And during that time, when the patient is being shifted, you will complete your history. So what constitutes an actually accurate history at this stage? Bolo.
Sir, the mode of injury, whether there was any fall from height or any hit by blunt object, mode of injury is important, and then loss of consciousness.
And mode of injury and
Sir, then the loss of consciousness, whether the patient has been unconscious just after the trauma, or whether he had regained consciousness in between, or he's still unconscious from that point of time. Then if there is any ENT bleed or not, then seizure to we had already seen when the patient was brought to us. So then we will.
okay, yes. So you raised 4 points at this stage. That is A, mode of injury; B, loss of consciousness timing; C, ENT bleed. So why do you think each of these is important? Mode of injury, how is it important?
Sir, if there is any
How does it change your management?
Yes, sir. Sir, if there is a sharp blow on the head, there may be chances of extradural hemorrhage more, because a sharp blow leads to arterial disruption that can cause this type of injury. And sir, one more history I would like to take, whether the patient was under the influence of alcohol or any drug intoxication was there, and whether the patient was on anticoagulants or not. These two histories I would like to add.
Good. So come back to your first point again, mode of injury.
Yes, sir.
See, why is mode of injury so important? It is because whenever you find a patient in an unconscious state, that is with that kind of GCS, with a head trauma, you have to assume that a cervical spine injury exists. So you have to image the cervical spine in all cases, and you have to stabilize the cervical spine also. So while in your primary survey, whenever you see that a patient has low GCS, at least put a collar on straight away until the cervical spine is evaluated radiologically. So so now that you've sent the patient off to a CT scan, remember to write a requisition for a cervical spine CT also. Secondly, your mode of injury will also get you up to speed with other regions that may have been injured, that is limbs, thorax and abdomen, genitals, okay, and any burns or any complex injuries that may be there, any chemical spills, okay, any smoke inhalation, those things are also into the picture of mode of injury. Achha. The second point that you raised was the existence of ENT bleed. Right?
Yes, sir.
So why is that important?
Sir,
Why is
to
that important?
replicate skull-based fractures, like in anterior cranial fossa fracture, there may be epistaxis or CSF rhinorrhea. Raccoon eyes was already present, as you have mentioned. In
Yes.
case of
So patient already had an anterior skull base fracture. So at this
yes,
stage, see, if there is bleeding from an anterior skull base fracture, there is ongoing bleeding. Suppose the patient is streaming out blood from both nostrils. What can you do at this stage?
sir, I will give IV tranexamic acid stat and go for nasal packing.
No. Nasal packing is no.
Oh, anterior skull-based
Suppose the
fracture. No, sir. Complete will be damaged.
exactly.
Sorry,
So
sir.
what can you do? You give Tranexa.
Yes, sir. Sir, we can.
What else?
Sir,
Your airway is already in. Okay, patient is at risk of drowning from blood. Your airway is already in. Patient has bleeding. You can plug just the nostrils so that the blood doesn't come out that way, and you can put a suction inside the oral cavity to see how much blood is coming. Okay, so that the field is not a mess. You can use something called Merocel for just anterior nasal packing. Okay, what is Merocel? Merocel is basically a non-absorbable sponge which exerts pressure on the lateral nasal cavity walls. So any mucosal bleeding, Merocel can stop, but skull-based bleeding, Merocel cannot stop. Okay, so any definitive management of this, if the patient is continuing to have bleeding, your CT scan will have to include CT angiography, which can show any bleeding from the anterior ethmoidal or posterior ethmoidal arteries. If those are there, the patient has to be taken to the radiology suite for an immediate embolization of anterior or posterior ethmoidal arteries, so that the bleeding can be stopped right there. There is no other way. Okay, you cannot control this surgically also, because ethmoidal arteries are not inside the skull. You cannot do a craniotomy and reach them, and in order to reach them through the ethmoidal route, you will have to then go through maybe an endoscopic approach, transnasal endoscopic approach, and this will require removal of more nasal cavity bone. So it is probably not a good idea, because to expose the ethmoidal arteries, you will have to go through the anterior skull base floor again to create some more injury. So embolization is the least invasive and most well tolerated approach of all of these. Okay. So no aggressive nasal packing. If you think that there is a bleed and there is skull base fracture, before attempting nasal packing, always do a CT. Okay, so to know what the extent of the skull base fracture is. So patient has nasal bleeding, you should add two things into your repertoire. One thing is a CT PNS needs to go into your radiological imaging, and secondly, if there is uncontrollable bleeding and patient is becoming hemodynamically unstable, also include a CT angio.
Okay, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Fine.
Shreya, 2% has died on the spot. Shreya, 2% has died on the spot in the same accident. What is the implication? In the same accident, 2% has died on the spot. What does it indicate?
So severity of the injury was
yes.
very,
yes, that indicates it is a major violation.
Very high velocity vehicular crash.
Yeah. So usually more cautious that this is also a patient who is might have been
that you may have some very severe thing going on inside this patient also. You have no right to assume that this person will be luckier than his friends. Okay. So acha, next third জিনিসটা কি বলেছিলি রে ভগবান?
Sir, ENT bleed, loss of consciousness. Oh, vomiting, sir. Vomiting and history.
Nah, you said consciousness, right? Your question, your thing was whether the person lost consciousness straight away, or whether there was some duration between the patient becoming head injured and loss of consciousness. So what are the loss of consciousness patterns following head injury? What happens? I'm giving you three scenarios. A patient one, fine. Patient one suffered head injury, was unresponsive for a few seconds, then got up, walked around normally, had some nasal bleeding, had black eye, came to the hospital, you saw him, you admitted the patient, end of story. Patient 2, same thing, got into the hospital, became unconscious. Patient 3 has been unconscious from the beginning. So what is going on? Patient 1 mein kya hua? What
Sir,
did patient
patient
1 have?
has most probably suffered from concussion. So there was a brief period of
What
loss
is
of
concussion?
consciousness. Sir, concussion
That's a
is
brief period of loss of consciousness following trauma.
yes, sir. Sir,
Uh,
there is no structural brain damage due.
Concussion usually does not indicate lasting brain damage, but
Yes.
it may mask some things. And besides, post-concussion syndromes are manifold. Too many things happen. Patients can have headache for the rest of their lives. Patient can have multiple psychological problems after concussion. Okay, so concussion is not a mild thing overall. If the patient has had concussion, you have to very carefully evaluate whether the patient is actually conscious and oriented at that point of time, because many people keep walking around and performing automatic activities and may look normal from a distance, but you have to properly talk to them to understand whether they are conscious and oriented and going through normal phase of activities rather than just doing automatisms. Okay, so when there are many examples of people who became injured and they in a football field, okay, footballer is playing football, suddenly got up to give a header, দুজনের মাথা ঠুকে গেল. So one guy became unconscious, the other guy got up and walked out of the field, sat down on the sideline and started drinking water. Referee came and asked him, "Kire, ঠিক আছিস তো?" The footballer did not respond. So this person is also concussed. Okay, the fact that he's walking around doesn't mean that he's normal. This is also concussion. A person who is concussed can also get up and walk around. He can perform automatic activities like drinking water. He can perform automatic activities like maybe going to the bathroom. But if you talk to them, they will not respond properly. So all of these things can happen. So concussion can have many types of presentations, and you have absolutely no idea that whether a concussed person does not have anything going on inside because of the second scenario, that is a person who became concussed regained consciousness for some time and then became unconscious again. This is called
lucid interval, sir.
Okay, so lucid interval is present in what kinds of head injury?
Sir, it is
everybody seems to say epidural hematoma. Now, for everyone's information, epidural hematoma accounts for 1% of all head injuries requiring admission. In only 22% of patients with epidural hematoma is a lucid interval present. So, although lucid interval is blamed on epidural hematoma, epidural hematoma is not its only cause. It can happen in SDH also. It can happen in traumatic ICH also. It can happen in diffuse axonal injury also. Okay, so I have seen people with diffuse axonal injury gradually develop brain swelling, was completely normal to start with, then became unconscious, stayed unconscious for 1 month. On MRI, all we found was a corpus callosum tear, nothing else. Okay, so anything can happen. Lucid interval for exam purposes indicates epidural hematoma. If some examiner asks you what does lucid interval indicate, you will say, sir, it is most commonly due to an epidural hematoma, and you will absolutely correct from an exam perspective. But for real life, please understand, lucid interval can happen in any kind of head injury. Okay, acha. So the third scenario, patient has been unconscious from the beginning. What does this indicate? This indicates that there is some severe brain damage.
Yes, sir.
And it can be anything. It can be any kind of intracranial hematoma arising from trauma. It can be either EDH or subdural or subarachnoid or brain traumatic ICH. Okay,
so
this
can be
or diffuse axonal injury.
Yes, sir. So this can, yes, sir.
Okay, the commonest head injury, the commonest form of head injury in high velocity motor vehicle crashes is DII. Okay,
Yes.
so DII is the commonest mode. But the other ones are also there, and many times things can coexist. When a person can have EDH along with DI, person can have SDH along with DI. Okay, person can have EDH along with subarachnoid hemorrhage. Anything can happen. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So this history part is done. Now, two other important things that you added was anticoagulant medications and antiplatelet medications. So suppose on asking this patient's son, যে উনি কি কোনো ওষুধ খান যাতে রক্ত পাতলা হয়, the patient's son responds, হ্যাঁ উনি ইকোস্প্রিন এভি খান.
Yes, sir.
ঠিক আছে? So what does that indicate? Ecosprin AV, for the people that don't know, is 75 milligrams aspirin and 10 milligrams atorvastatin. So what will you do? at this stage.
Sir,
With this information, you got this information. What does this indicate? Aspirin is a what drug? It is
sir,
anticoagulant, antiplatelet.
yes, anticoagulant, antiplatelet. Sir, with aspirin 75 milligram, right now I will think of more towards acute SDH.
কি বললি শুনতে পেলাম না, anticoagulant না antiplatelet?
Sir, antiplatelet.
আচ্ছা, antiplatelet reversible না irreversible?
Sir, reversible.
Reversible. Did you say
Sir,
reversible or irreversible?
Sir, I said reversible.
There is only one reversible platelet antagonist, and that is ticagrelor. Okay, everything else is irreversible. If a platelet has been exposed to aspirin once, that platelet for its lifespan does not work. Okay, platelet count may be normal, but the platelet will not work. So this is a qualitative platelet dysfunction, not a quantitative platelet dysfunction. Mane ki, if you do a platelet count, it will come out to be normal, but if you do a platelet function test, it will come out to be abnormal. A person who is getting 75 milligrams of aspirin every day has a moderately increased risk of bleed with trauma, but not a severely increased risk of bleed. If this person were to be taking clopidogrel, you would have been very scared. But if it is aspirin, you have a little breathing room. Aspirin usually is not that bad. But if a person has evidence of intracranial hematoma and is unconscious after head trauma and has a history of taking aspirin, then you have to do what?
Sir, I will.
Then you have to reverse the antiplatelet activity of aspirin. Okay. How do you reverse the antiplatelet activity of aspirin?
So, we can give platelet transfusion.
Yes, that is the only way. You have to give platelets. So what
Yes.
kind of platelet will you give?
So, single donor.
How many
platelet.
types of platelet are there? How
So,
many types
single-
of platelet are there? So there is SDP and there is RDP, right? So what is the
So-
difference between the two?
So, single donor will have platelets donated from one person, and random donor that accumulated from multiple blood transfusions.
Okay, so which one is more readily available in a blood bank?
Sir, RDP is more available.
So you will only get RDP. For SDP, you need to have a blood group matched donor who will come, give the blood. Okay, how do you know how an SDP is collected? SDP is collected, mane তুই ধর কাউকে SDP দিবি, you will walk into a blood bank, they will put a channel in your hand. Okay, they will take out your blood, extract the platelets from it and transfuse the rest of it back to you. That is SDP. Okay,
Yes,
ঠিক
sir.
আছে,
Thanks,
ব্লাডটা
sir.
নেবে, সেন্ট্রিফিউজ করবে, প্লেটলেটটা বের করে নিয়ে বাকিটা তোকে ফেরত দিয়ে দেবে। So it will take time. SDP is given for immune platelet dyscrasias, where blood group mediated platelet destruction may happen. Platelets usually do not exhibit blood group antigens, but some minor blood group antigens may be expressed. That is why grouped and cross-matched donors have to give platelets in patients. Say a patient has say DIC, a patient has say ITP. Okay, in those patients SDP is required. In a trauma patient where platelet is required quickly, you have to give RDP. Okay,
Yes,
so
sir.
how many platelets? How many platelets? How many RDP units? How much platelet does one unit of RDP contain?
Sir, around 100 ml.
50 to 150 ml. Okay,
Okay,
50 থেকে 150 ml এর মধ্যে থাকে একটা ব্যাগে।
Yes.
Okay, so you will
Yes.
need about 200 to 300 ml of platelets to reverse the antiplatelet activity of aspirin.
okay, sir. Yes, sir.
So 6 units aspirin will do. Suppose the patient's son told you that this patient receives Ecosprin AV and clopilate 75. Now what? Clopidogrel is a different animal. Okay,
Yes, sir. It's,
why is clopidogrel a different animal?
sir, it's an anticoagulant.
Clopidogrel is what? No, clopidogrel is also an antiplatelet, irreversible antiplatelet, but clopidogrel is an ADP inhibitor, which means that its activity stays for 7 days. And
Yes.
if you give platelets to a clopidogrel taking person, clopidogrel will destroy the platelets that you are giving him. ওর ব্লাডে ক্লোপিডোগ্রেল থাকবে, তুই যে প্লেটলেট গুলো দিবি সেই প্লেটলেট গুলোকে ক্লোপিডোগ্রেল উড়িয়ে দেবে, আরো বেশি প্লেটলেট লাগবে. So we'll have to give 6 unit platelets for destroying the clopidogrel in the circulation, so that those platelets sacrifice themselves to the god of clopidogrel. And the remaining platelets that you will give, another 6 units, they will replenish the working platelets in the body. So a person who is getting clopidogrel will require 6 plus 6. Okay,
Okay, sir. Yes, sir.
12 units RDP given over a period of 12 hours. Okay, you cannot give 12 units RDP like flash. Patient will die of blood transfusion related morbidity. Okay.
Yes, sir.
ठीक है. So suppose the patient is taking now there is another problem. This is COVID season. Everybody is taking rivaroxaban, apixaban and all those things. Okay, so what are
Yes.
they? Are they anticoagulants or antiplatelets? Patient had history of
They are
COVID. Patient was
anticoagulants,
taking.
sir. So they are anticoagulants.
Patient had history of COVID. Patient is taking Eliquis tablet. Patient party has told you this. Eliquis is apixaban. Apixaban is something called a NOAC, novel anticoagulant, which is a direct acting factor 10A inhibitor.
Yes, sir.
Orally taken. How do you reverse this guy?
Sir, FFP transfusion.
इसको
in
कैसे
our
reverse
system.
करेगा?
Sir,
FFP will not work. You will need liters and liters of FFP. 15-16 unit FFP লাগবে. So what can reverse NOAC? NOAC can be reversed by
Sir, there are few monoclonal antibodies.
Yes, andexanate. Andexanate is a drug that can reverse it, but andexanate is not available in Kolkata. Okay, so you are sitting in Calcutta. What can you give? You can give something called prothrombin complex concentrate. Okay,
Yes, sir.
prothrombin complex concentrate is available from Bharat Serums under the brand name Octaplex. Okay, so this is the only thing that can reverse it. It has to be given at the dose of 20 to 30 international units per kg body weight.
Okay, sir.
But if you give a NOAC, remember that you cannot use INR or APTT to monitor. You cannot rely on prothrombin time INR or APTT to properly assess the coagulation status. It cannot be monitored that way. Okay, if the patient is receiving warfarin, you can use AFP to monitor. Well, you can use AFP to reverse AFP and vitamin K, and you can use prothrombin time to monitor. If the patient is receiving unfractionated heparin, you can use APTT to monitor. But if a patient is receiving either one of these novel anticoagulants or a low molecular weight heparin, then you have nothing to monitor it with. Okay,
Okay,
there is
sir.
no way it can be monitored. So you don't know whether the patient is severely anticoagulated enough to warrant reversal. হ্যাঁ, মানে রিভার্সালের দরকার আছে কিনা সেটাও জানতে পারবি না। আছে মানে তোকে ধরে নিতে হবে যে খুব খারাপ আছে, ঠিক আছে, কোয়াগুলেশন পাথওয়ে খুব খারাপ আছে, রিভার্স করতেই হবে। ফাইন। সো লেসন্স লার্নড, platelet reverses antiplatelets and FFP reverses heparin, মানে unfractionated heparin. Vitamin K reverses unfractionated heparin. Vitamin K reverses oral anticoagulants, that is warfarin and acenocumalone. FFP reverses both heparin and acenocumalone and warfarin. And for NOACs, you will require something called prothrombin complex concentrate or a drug called andexanate, which is not available here. Delhi te paoja jay, ekhane paoja jay na. ঠিক আছে, so much for anticoagulation. Now proceed to CT scan হয়ে গেছে, ঠিক আছে?
Yes, sir.
Fine, CT scan has been done. So SAT told us to discuss two scenarios, that is in scenario number 1 a patient has an epidural hematoma, scenario number 2 patient has a subdural hematoma. So we will deal with scenario number 1 first. So what is the radiological appearance of an epidural hematoma? ছোট্ট করে বলে দাও।
Sir, it will be biconvex, hyperdense biconvex structure in between the cranium and the dura mater of the brain.
And the dura. तो CT scan तो dura देखा जाए, you will see a biconvex shaped or lenticular shaped collection which is just outside the brain and compressing the brain.
Yes,
ठीक है? तो how does an epidural hematoma happen?
Sir, usually in the temporal region, it occurs from bleed from the middle meningeal artery. In case it occurs in the frontal
middle
region,
meningeal artery কেন bleed করবে?
So due to
Why will middle
trivial
meningeal
trauma,
artery suddenly decide to bleed?
so due to
There will be trauma.
trivial
Trauma will
trauma
cause what?
over the squamous part of the temporal bone, usually there is a
Uh,
fracture over the bone, and that leads
yes.
to
Yes.
laceration of the
So
vessel.
there will be a temporal bone fracture which will go across the foramen of the middle meningeal artery, which is called foramen
Yes,
what?
sir.
Middle meningeal artery কি foramen দিয়ে ঢোকে রে? স্কালে নাম জানিস?
ভুলে গেছি, sir. I don't remember, sir.
Foramen spinosum. Foramen spinosum admits middle meningeal artery. Foramen spinosum এর পরে একটা groove থাকে, middle meningeal artery groove, which houses the middle meningeal artery inside the temporal bone. The groove is sometimes converted into a canal due to ossification of dura around it, especially in middle-aged males. ওদের EDH বেশি হয়, তো there is a chance that a temporal bone fracture can either injure the foramen spinosum itself or can injure the middle meningeal artery within this groove in its proximal portion, and this
Yes.
will cause an epidural hematoma which is centered over the temporal squama in the middle meningeal artery. This is the classical teaching of EDH. What are the other causes of EDH? আর কেন হয়? শুধু artery থেকেই হয়? Arterial EDH is 50% of all EDH. The remaining 50% is what?
So if it occurs in the vortex, then it can occur from the superior sagittal sinus. Mane EDH can also
So venous bleed,
occur from
yes.
venous bleeding.
Bleeding from veins or dural venous sinuses, that is dural veins or dural venous sinuses, can cause midline abutting EDHs. Okay. And what else? Venous
Sir,
bleeding is 27% of all EDH.
Okay.
ঠিক আছে, আর কি third cause?
Sir, venous, I know more of venous from the sigmoid sinus or the straight sinus.
বললাম তো cranial venous sinuses and dural veins, second cause. ঠিক আছে, they will cause midline abutting EDHs or sinus abutting EDHs. ঠিক আছে, সাইনাসের গায়ে EDH হবে, ঠিক। Third cause is diploic veins or diploic vessels, মানে cranial fracture হয়ে যে কোনো জায়গাতে মানে cranial fracture থাকলে there will be a dural stripping underneath the cranial fracture, and the diploic veins will bleed, and the diploic vessels will bleed into that space and create an EDH. These EDHs are usually small. They are called fracture EDH. ঠিক আছে, they may not be associated with any artery, just that there will be a cranial trauma at some point, there will be a fracture, and the dura will separate underneath it, and that area will house a small EDH. Okay, so these EDHs usually do not require surgical evacuation, but they get big enough to require surgical evacuation sometimes. Fourth category is something called separation EDH. কি হয় যে মোটামুটি sharp impact, মানে not a sharp object, sharp impact, একটা ধক করে একটা ধাক্কা খেলো কোথাও, তাতে কি হয় dura can get separated from the skull, and there a potential space is created which will bleed slowly, and this slow bleeding will gradually keep on accumulating inside that dural separation space and produce something called a delayed EDH, DEDH. A DEDH is usually visualized on CT scan more than 24 hours after trauma. মানে তুই প্রথমে একটা CT scan করলি, তাতে দেখা যাবে না, 24 ঘন্টা 48 ঘন্টা পরে CT scan এ দেখা যাবে। So whenever you see that a patient of head injury has had a normal CT scan and is still complaining of headache, you should do a repeat CT after 48 hours. Okay, to rule out DEDH. ঠিক আছে?
Yes, sir.
So this is about EDH. Now surgical management. When is surgery for an epidural hematoma indicated? Go.
Sir, in case of EDH, if the volume of the clot is more
এই
than
দাঁড়া,
36
একটা কি কোয়েশ্চেন এসেছে একটু।
Oh,
আচ্ছা, sorry, probably they don't want me to talk in Bengali. আচ্ছা, sorry. ঠিক, I'll stop. Okay. I assumed everybody knows Bengali.
No. There are some DNB students from outside West Bengal.
Okay. Sorry. I'll stay on English from now on. Acha, bol. Go ahead.
Sir, if the volume of the clot is more than 30 cc, or if the midline shift is more than 5 millimeters, or if the clot is
Shreya, I will stop you there. That is not how you say this. Okay. The Brain Trauma Foundation guidelines for management of epidural hematoma Brain Trauma Foundation guidelines for management of epidural hematoma state that all epidural hematomas must be surgically evacuated unless the patient's Glasgow Coma Scale score is 15 and all of those things, that the volume of the EDH is less than 30 cc, that the midline shift is less than 5 millimeter, that the thickness of the EDH is less than 15 mm, and all of those things. Fine.
Okay. Okay, sir.
Okay, so this is how you say it. An EDH which is 20 mm, yes, definitely it has to be evacuated. But if you are answering a question in an examination, this is how you say it, that the patient's GCS should be good, that is above 12. The patient's EDH volume should be low. The patient's EDH should not be thick, and there should not be a large midline shift. If you don't know the numbers, if you answer like this, it will be accepted. Okay. You don't have to know 30 cc or 30 cc or 32.1 cc. If it's a big EDH, the examiner will ask you, what do you mean by big EDH? Sir, if it is more than 30 cc, I will consider it a big EDH. Fine. If you have evacuated a 25 cc EDH, nobody is going to say that you are wrong. Okay.
Yes, sir. Okay.
Fine. And where will you evacuate an EDH which is less than 30 cc?
Sir, if there is worsening neurological signs.
No, even if the patient is full GCS and has no focal deficits,
Yeah.
when will you evacuate an EDH which is less than 30 cc in volume or less than 15 mm in diameter? If it is in the posterior fossa. Okay. A posterior fossa EDH has half everything. Okay. 15 mm volume. 10 millimeter thickness. Posterior fossa EDHs are more dangerous. They have 40% mortality, remember. So, if a patient has a posterior fossa EDH with significant compression on the cerebellum and the fourth ventricle and the brainstem, radiologically, go ahead and evacuate. Evacuation is very easy. Single burr suffices in most cases, and it's not a big problem per se if you have done the operation. If you have not done it and the patient dies, okay. Achha. So, management of EDH is usually a craniotomy, not a craniectomy. Right? What is the difference between the two?
Sir, in craniotomy,
what is the difference between the two?
Yes, sir. Sir, in craniotomy, we put the bone out, drain the clot, secure hemostasis, and then put back the bone because
yes, the bone flap is put back.
Yeah.
Because you have evacuated the mass lesion which is causing the problem, so you are not expecting any problems in the post-operative period. So any lasting decompression is not required. When you do a craniectomy, that is when you think that the underlying brain is very tense and swollen, and you think that putting the bone flap back will increase the ICP. There you will not put it back. So then it becomes a decompressive craniectomy. So in all of these cases, usually the dura is also opened and an extravasoplasty is done, or the dura is left open. In many cases, this is not usually done in an EDH. It can be done in an acute SDH or a traumatic intracerebral bleed or a hemispheric cerebral edema or a bihemispheric cerebral edema. Okay. So EDH usually you will have to do a craniotomy and a bone flap replacement unless it is in the posterior fossa, in which case you will do a burr hole or a craniectomy. Posterior fossa you do not do bone flap replacement. Okay. Posterior fossa you open the EDH and you leave the bone flap out. Why? Because the potential space in the posterior fossa is a lot more than on the convexity of the scalp. Why? Because posterior fossa is covered underneath all of your neck strap muscles. So there is a lot of space under the neck strap muscles. If you put the bone back and there is a wound hematoma, that will act as an EDH again. So you leave the bone flap out. Best. Okay. So EDH completed. Now suppose you are doing an EDH operation. Have you seen one?
Yes, sir.
Hello?
Sir, am I audible?
Yeah.
She
has seen
an
EDH
operation?
Yes, sir.
Acha, kothay dekhechiস? Where did you see?
Sir, Neurosurgery Rotation Trauma Care Center, SSKM Hospital.
Okay. So how was it done? So you do a craniotomy which is surrounding, which encompasses the entire EDH within its, or most of the EDH within its field. You evacuate the EDH using dissector and suction and irrigation. Then what do you do?
So we try to find out the bleeding vessels so that we can secure hemostasis and prevent further
ठीक है,
rebleed.
you coagulate any bleeding vessels, fine. Then what do? What is the most effective way to secure hemostasis and prevent recurrence after any EDH? This is the
So
question.
dural hitch
Good.
sutures are
Yes,
placed.
dural
Dural
tack-up sutures, dural
Yes.
tack-up sutures or dural hitch sutures are placed all around. What will they do? They will oppose the dura to the inner table of the cranium so that there is no potential space. This has two effects. One, it eliminates potential space and therefore reduces the chances of recurrence. And secondly, it presses the dura against the skull 360 degrees so that there is no bleeding from the field anymore.
Yes.
Okay, so the dural vessels get compressed against the skull and they stop bleeding. Okay,
Yes.
so EDH questions completed. Now come to acute SDH. Patient has acute SDH. So what do you think is better? If somebody were to give you a choice that your patient can have either EDH or acute SDH, which one would you choose?
Sir, SDH, acute SDH.
You would choose acute SDH. Why?
Uh-huh.
Acute SDH is far worse prognosis and far worse mortality. You will obviously choose EDH. Okay. If your patient is supposed to have either EDH or acute SDH, you will obviously choose EDH. EDH has a better prognosis, much better prognosis. Why does acute SDH have such a bad prognosis?
Sir, because it compresses on the brain parenchyma.
No, it is the method of injury in acute SDH that causes problems. How does an acute SDH happen?
Sir, the cortical bridging veins usually tear leading
Okay,
to
what is a cortical bridging vein?
Sir, the veins that
Where
travel
does
from
it
the
go?
cortex. Sir,
Huh?
it goes. Sir, cortex থেকে it goes to the scalp. Now, outside
You're
the dura.
breaking up actually. Acha, am I audible to everybody?
Yes, you're audible.
So it's not my network then. Okay, so a cortical bridging vein is something that will traverse from a vein on the cortex to a dural vein.
Yes. Sir.
Okay,
Yes, sir.
it will travel from a vein on the cortex to a dural vein. Now, cortical bridging veins are things that basically hang in the subdural space. The brain hangs from them. So they are
Yes,
very
sir.
amenable to tearing, especially if the brain is atrophic and there is a lot of room between the cranium and the brain. So that is why cortical bridging veins are the most common method of injury in elderly people. Now, in young patients, how does acute SDH happen? In young patients, acute SDH happens by rupture of cortical arteries. They are arterial
Okay.
SDHs. Okay, you will often find that after evacuating them, there are spurting arteries on the surface of the brain. So they have a potential to exert extremely high amounts of pressure on the brain. An arterial SDH will occupy a very large potential space. The entire subdural space is one space.
Yes.
Okay. Although you say that it is a space within the dural border cells are basically a layer which anchors the dura to the brain. When you open the dura, it's almost not visible because the dura just comes off the brain like there is nothing between them. But there are some cells and some flimsy connective tissue existing in that layer between the dura and the brain, and this is called the dural border cell layer. And SDH usually occurs within this layer.
Okay.
But when you open the brain, you will almost never see this layer. It will it doesn't exist. It's a very large potential space. Okay, and a very large amount of blood can be accumulated within it. And the third method by which an acute SDH can happen is something called a burst lobe. What is a burst lobe? It is that a patient has had a contrico injury, that is the brain has gone and hit the cranium, and
Yes,
there is a contusion on the surface of the brain, and the brain there has kept bleeding. So there is underlying brain damage along with a large acute SDH. So these are the reasons why an acute SDH has a bad prognosis overall. Because one, if a cortical bridging vein is damaged, it will give rise to a venous infarct in the territory of that vein. Secondly, if there is a burst lobe, then obviously the brain is damaged under it. And thirdly, if it is an arterial etiology SDH, it will create immense amount of pressure on the surface of the brain, because obviously that is arterial pressure that clot has to reach before it can stop bleeding from the artery and achieve a stable state. So these are the reasons why acute SDH is far worse. You will also know that in infants and in elderly people above the age of 70, the dura and the brain are very closely adherent to each other. So these are the two populations which do not get EDHs at all. They only get acute SDH. Okay. So now patient has acute SDH. What does acute SDH look like? Biconcave shape if it is a convexity SDH. But SDHs can happen in many different other places. So what are they? A convexity SDH is your classical biconcave SDH. SDH can also happen over the tentorium. It can give rise to a coating over the tentorium, thick tent appearance. That is called a tentorial acute SDH. It can happen between the hemispheres of the brain. That is called an interhemispheric acute SDH. Okay. And it can happen in the posterior fossa, which can also be a convexity SDH or a tentorial SDH or a cerebral falcine, falx cerebri along the falx cerebelli. That is an interhemispheric cerebellar SDH. So there are altogether 6 different types of SDHs that can happen. Convexity supratentorial, convexity infratentorial. Okay. Then tentorial supratentorial, tentorial infratentorial, and interhemispheric supratentorial, interhemispheric infratentorial. Fine, 6 types of SDH. So when does an SDH need operative evacuation? Now this question is easier to answer than EDH, because here you can say all of those things. Sir, midline shift, sir, thickness. Okay, go ahead. Bolo.
Sir, if the thickness is more than 1 centimeter, or there is midline shift more than 5 millimeters, or the patient has gradually decreasing neurological status, worsening neurological status.
What is, no, you have to define that. You have to define worsening neurological status for acute SDH, because the Brain Trauma Foundation guidelines actually encompass something called a 2-point drop in the Glasgow Coma Scale score examined at the emergency and 2 hours later. Okay, so if there is a more than 2-point drop, you have to open an SDH even if it has less than 5 millimeter midline shift, remember. But if a patient, suppose, has come to you whose GCS is full, patient has no focal deficits, and his midline shift is 7 mm, what will you do? These are questions that are best left. These are questions that are best left to the discretion of the treating neurosurgeon. Right? Because if you are doing an acute SDH, it means that you are doing a decompressive craniectomy. You are taking off half the cranium and leaving the patient without half a khopda for a very long duration. Okay, so you have to weigh the morbidity of the surgery against the possibility that the patient may be managed conservatively only and can have almost no problems later in life. So there is a bit of a judgment call in management of acute SDH, especially if the patient is full GCS. If the patient has no headache, full GCS, no focal deficits, and has an acute SDH which is 7 millimeters, very commonly seen, especially in elderly people. Okay, because they have a lot of space between the brain and the dura. So acute SDH can be very friendly also. So if it is a friendly acute SDH, best you don't touch it. But there is a chance that it may become a chronic SDH later. What is a chronic SDH? Chronic SDH is when an acute SDH develops neomembranes and leaking capillaries inside it, and it starts to expand by generating something called a motor oil fluid, which is basically an ultrafiltrate of blood containing hemosiderin deposits and lipids. And that can exert pressure on the brain, and in that case it is mostly a liquid thing and it can be taken out with 2 bottles only. So in many cases we have seen that a patient with an acute SDH presented, had no problems for quite a while, was discharged from the hospital, came back 2 months later with a slight hemiparesis. We did a CT scan, we found that there is a chronic SDH. We evacuated that by 2 bottles. Patient was doing fine, so patient was spared the requirement for decompressive craniectomy, which maybe could have been done because he had a 6-7 millimeter midline shift at the beginning, but he did quite well, so he got off lightly. And this is a very common scenario in practice, so this can happen. So try to remember that. So now acute SDH you will evacuate by doing a decompressive craniectomy if it's thick, if it is a thick acute SDH, or if it is creating a GCS drop, or if it is creating a focal deficit, or if it is causing seizures, or if it is causing persistent headache, which is debilitating to the patient. So these are the indications for opening an acute SDH. When a full GCS patient with a 5 millimeter midline shift and a patient who has a debilitating headache This is also according to the BTFG a condition where an acute SDH may need to be operated. Although this is not a very common way, not a very common indication, but this is also done. Just to relieve headache, you may need to operate an acute SDH. Okay, so you have seen an acute SDH operation?
Yes, sir.
Okay, 30 minutes done.
Post-op.
Hello, sir.
Post-op. How do you manage post-op?
Post-op
Following,
management.
Following EDH or SDH
Okay.
drainage, where the patient should be treated.
Okay, okay. So, EDH का post-op order. What will you write? Post-operative order for an EDH patient.
Sir, I will keep the patient on IV fluids, which are not hyperosmolar or hypoosmolar, isoosmolar IV fluids, and then I will.
You will give RL. You will give Ringal lactate. Ringal lactate is isoosmolar.
No, sir. I will prefer.
You will not give NS. NS is slightly hyperosmolar.
Sir, I
All
will
neurosurgical patients get NS. Okay,
Yes, sir.
normal saline, normal saline, normal saline. Repeat after me. Okay, no ringer. Why? Because ringer contains lactate, which will get
Yes.
metabolized, and the end result is a hypotonic fluid.
Yes, sir.
Fine.
Yes, sir.
So you will have to think about metabolism also. You can give DNS, you can give NS. Both of these fluids are actually slightly hyperosmolar. DNS is very hyperosmolar, but they can cause, the end result fluid that comes out of them is still not hypoosmolar. You cannot give anything that is hypoosmolar or can be metabolized to become hypoosmolar.
Yes,
Okay.
sir.
So NS
Yes, sir.
is a good enough resuscitation fluid for the early period. So in postoperative order, you will give normal saline at maintenance fluid doses
Yes,
for
sir.
as long as the patient cannot eat. But remember that all neurosurgical patients, if they can be fed, should be fed within 24 hours. Matlab, you should be reducing the IV fluid volume and starting Ryle's tube feeding if the patient is not conscious by the next day only. Because head injury is a hypercatabolic state. So you should start off with at least 1000 kilocalorie daily intake by the next day.
Okay. Okay, sir.
Achha. So what else will you give? You will give some antibiotic to cover for the surgery. So once again, in neuro, there are some problems. You cannot give nitroimidazoles; they cause seizures. You cannot give fluoroquinolones; they cause encephalopathy. Okay.
Okay, sir.
Nitroimidazole money you cannot give metronidazole. Fluoroquinolones money you cannot give all of your fluoxetines.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Any second generation cephalosporin or carbapenem will do. Vancomycin will do. Linezolid will do. Okay.
Yes,
But
sir.
you cannot give any fluoroquinolone. You cannot give any nitroimidazole unless absolutely clinically indicated. Suppose the patient has an abdominal injury also, and you think that patient can develop abdominal sepsis, or you have done a colostomy and you think you need metronidazole for that, then give. Okay. Then the benefits outweigh the risks. But if there is no other reason, you should not give them. Antibiotic choice done. You will give a PPI. Why?
Sir, to prevent Cushing ulcers, stress ulcers in
Yes, to prevent acute stress
producing-
gastritis ulcers.
Yes, sir.
Achha, what will you do for analgesia? What will you do for analgesia?
So paracetamol and tramadol.
See, okay, NSAIDs are not supposed to be given because they cause platelet inhibition again, even in low doses. So NSAIDs can actually exacerbate bleeding in the postoperative period, and they can also cause gastritis. So we avoid NSAIDs mostly. Now, tramadol is a very bad opioid in the sense that it kindles seizures. Okay, opioids overall reduce seizure threshold, but there are some opioids which do not reduce seizure threshold and are very friendly. These opioids can also be given sometimes in a non-invasive manner. That is, you can use a buprenorphine patch or a fentanyl patch. They can give you excellent analgesia. Okay, at very low risk of seizures. Tramadol we usually avoid because tramadol causes dysphoria, tramadol causes vomiting, and tramadol can cause seizures also. So paracetamol is a very safe bet for postoperative analgesia. Most patients do well on paracetamol only. If you need further analgesia, you can use fentanyl, you can use buprenorphine, both as patches or as IV also you can give, but they can cause respiratory suppression, so monitoring is required. Or you can use something called nalmefene, which is a partial agonist opioid and has excellent safety as regards seizure and encephalopathy. Very safe. Okay. Next is anti-epileptic.
Yeah.
So anyone will do unless the patient has seizures, in which case one drug at high dose or maybe 2 drugs may need to be tried. Do not give 2 drugs prophylactically. Okay. If the patient has no history of seizures, you can only stay on 1 drug, either levetiracetam or phenytoin.
Yes, sir.
It is preferable that you do not use other drugs. Suppose valproate, you should not use. Valproate has antiplatelet activity. Okay.
Okay,
So that is for antiplatelet. Acha, you can use what other drugs are required?
So we have to use mannitol to reduce the intracranial pressure.
We are doing an EDH here.
Also not in EDH.
EDH
EDH
we will not give mannitol.
Yes, sir.
Unless the patient has contusions on the CT. If the patient has EDH along with underlying contusions, then you evacuate the EDH and give mannitol. If a patient has EDH with underlying contusions, in the preoperative period, you should not give mannitol. Why? Because the brain will shrink and the EDH will grow.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Because mannitol will cause the brain to shrink and the epidural space to expand. So EDH may grow. Although this is not written in textbooks, you will not find any neurosurgical textbook which says this, that you should not give mannitol in EDH preoperatively. But almost everybody follows this dictum that if there is a surgically evacuable EDH, you evacuate it first and then give mannitol. Okay,
Yes.
that is safe.
Yeah, thank you.
So
Soumitra.
evacuate the EDH and give mannitol.
Yeah.
Acha, okay, sir. Time up.
Thank you. Thank you. Very nice discussion.
Okay, sir.
Dr. Soumitra has taken us.
Thank you, everybody.
Very good discussion on medical management of head injury, which is very important. You should not confine only to find the indication of surgery and doing a bar hole. The other part is also very important. So, any comment from Dr. Acharji? Any comment?
I just only want to thank Dr. Chaudhary for such a lucid discussion. It's really illuminating for us also.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Chaudhary. Excellent.
I think there is no other chat. Okay, Soumitra, thank you very much. We had a very nice discussion. The approach to the patient of head injury. Actually, we have discussed the primary injury part. That's why I have not gone to the ABCD today. We have gone through the specific management of compressing hematomas. A nice discussion. Thank you, Soumitra. Thank you.
Professor Sah, just one point more.
Thank you, sir.
Just one point more for the students.
Yeah.
When a patient has a head injury, he or she is also likely to have injuries elsewhere in the body. So don't forget about that.
Yeah. It's comprehensive. We have just confined to the
that's the point to remember.
Part, but yes, the management will also include the first ultrasound of the abdomen and then detailed examination from
that is routine.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. We'll see you on Saturday.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Shreya.
Thank you, sir.